Hey everyone, Scorp here. I'm gonna make a short Duelist of the Roses video. I doubt this is gonna take that long, but I just wanted to go over something for how I'd build, this is how I go about building decks, and then this is also scalable to how you would build a deck for any amount of deck cost limit that you have. So starting off, I have plants. I have here about 33 cards that I'd probably put in every single plant deck, regardless of how expensive I want to make the plant deck. So deck leader doesn't matter, just level 5 plus, because I don't like the HP regen for the low level plants. Green Kappas and Eye Armors, so this is just these are really strong. I include them in so many decks because they're so good. And they're low deck cost, so they might as well be core in most deck types. I'll show one in this video where it's not like core that you'd have all of these. But if you have a deck that isn't doing a whole bunch of buffing or something, where you're super weak to magic neutralizing force field, but you have a deck where you can make decently strong things and you're going to use those as kind of boss monsters and you just need to have 6 extra big threats, I'd bring these almost every single time. So they're not plants, but I would just put them in every single plant deck. Next up, a bunch of fiends for fusing with my plants. So these are just some of the best effect fiends. If you want to, you can actually go lower deck cost than this. You can change out the Mask of Darknesses for Wretched Ghost of the Attic, and even drop it further, but I mean, I'm looking at 33 cards at 500 deck cost. I got plenty of room in this deck. I chose Mask of Darkness just because it's so good. It's super broken. Monster Eye also has a good effect. So 9 fiends to fuse with, and then I have plants. So Dark Plant probably is only going to ever be fusion fodder. But hey, it goes 1-for-1 with most opponent enemies if you have to just leave it in defense. And sometimes that Crush Train can bail you out, so if your opponent doesn't expect it, it's great. Next up, Maneater. You're playing plants. You're gonna change the field to forest, and then this thing just, if your opponent isn't expecting it, this thing is an AoE Maneater bug. It's super strong. And then Ancient Tree of Enlightenment. This thing stops traps. It's also fusion fodder, and Laughing Flower. All of these have absolutely insane effects. They're so good for their deck cost. And they're all great fusion pieces for fusion fodder to go into Rose Spectre of Dun. So all of this is level 3 or lower. All of this stuff I would put in every single plant deck. All of these cards are super good. This card's a Change of Heart on a stick. You can do some really wacky stuff with this to kill opposing creatures. You can also go for lethals with it. Absolutely wonderful. You can also steal stuff. It's great. Next up, 6 equips, because I always want to have at least 6 equips in my deck. Usually like to have 9. One other thing that you could say is core to this deck, because I'm using Maneaters, is probably a forest. So you'd put in 3 forests. I'm at 36 cards at 600 deck cost. So if you're probably the lowest any tournament would ever go is like 750 deck cost, and that would be like anemic for a lot of decks. But I have 4 slots here to put in whatever I want, and probably have the ability to put in 400 deck cost here if we're playing 1,000 deck cost format. So this could be literally anything. 400 deck cost for 4 cards is basically anything. Like, anything in this game fits in there. And we have Mask of Darknesses to recycle whatever these are. So I would highly recommend stuff like Mimikats, like a Mimikat, a Change of Heart, a a heal card. So you have duplicates of each of these too. So this is just a wonderful place to be at when you're building a deck. And this is why plants are absolutely amazing. If you're expecting to play against Pyros, there's not really a great answer for you. You're probably just going to be relying on your warriors to win that game for you. I would say that you could try to use Call of the Haunted, but unfortunately, that doesn't work well because Pyros still just wreck zombies also, which is really a problem. But you have 4 cards of option here. I would recommend against Magical Neutralizing Force Field. Also, if you want to go lower, you can. But, I mean, just take out the Forest, put in Call of the Haunted, put in... put in 3 Call of the Haunteds, put in 3 Curse Breakers. I mean, you can be like 500 some deck cost. There's no point to really go that low in deck cost, though. But, like, this is, like, what I would put in every single plant deck. And then you just have 4 cards that are whatever you want. Like, 4 Change of Hearts. Really, really, really good. Next up, you guys have seen me do plants, or not plants, but insects enough. Now, insects are a little more interesting for deck leaders. There is an argument to be made to go with a low-level deck leader. It has to be level 1, but it would get terrain change. I would hardly argue against it because you don't really need it since you're going to run 3 Arsenal Bugs, so I'd probably throw in a level 5+ deck leader, so Dungeon Worm in this case, or we can go down Javelin Beetle works, so does Arsenal Bug, and somewhere around here is Pugum, Great Moth. All of those are great deck leaders. But going in, insects have this great thing called Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth that they can play really easily with Pupa. Green Kappa and Armor just fuel off of that really well, so I put these 6 as always core and insects. Jiraiya, absolutely amazing effect. With like 2 equips and this thing being in your deck leader range, it's basically impossible to beat over this thing, so absolutely amazing. 3 Maneater Bugs, they're basically just a solution to gigantic problems like a triple equipped Jiraiya. So Maneater Bug, also wonderful. And then 3 Pupa of Moths and 3 Arsenal Bugs. Pupa of Moth it goes into Pugum in 1 turn. It's so ridiculously good. 3 Arsenal Bugs, with this gives you all of your forests you need. It's a 3,500 attack creature when you have an insect leader, 4,000 in its range. Yeah, and we're only 18 cards in, then you get your 6 equips. And we're at 540 deck cost, so we actually have... So this is what I would play in every insect deck ever. I don't think any of these are actually negotiable. You just put all of these in. Now, with all that said, you have a ton of options for insects to get yourself up to the last 16 cards. I would highly advise against Great Moth and Perfectly Ultimate because you already have Jiraiya at 4 and Arsenal Bug at 7. So instead, what I would usually do, usually what I throw in is like Larva of Moth with Time Wizards. Super great. Larva of Moth plus Time Wizard is a fusion, creates Great Moth instantly. It also fuses with Pupa of Moth, the Time Wizard does, to make Pugum instantly, which is really strong. If you're not going that route though, if we go down here a bit, into the Immortals, you can put in 3 Jowls of Dark Demise. They're 54 deck cost for 3 more cards. This thing is a Change of Heart on a stick. which is absolutely ridiculously good. So I'd probably put 3 of those in most of my decks. You could consider putting this in the plant deck too, but I think that deck has so much overhead and really wants to play some big spells because of the Mask of Darknesses that this card's not as good in there. But once you're there, I mean, so now as insects, there's a lot of good cards, and I'll just highlight some of them. Monster Reborns. You can Monster Reborn a Pupa of Moth and just instantly make another Perfectly Ultimate the next turn, which is super, super strong. Mimikat's just strong in every single deck. It's just amazing. It's a Monster Reborn plus a Grave Robber. Really good. You probably don't need to play Forest in this deck. So this card is really good. You might want to play 1, but because you have Arsenal Bug, you probably don't need to play it. Which actually saves up 90 deck cost over 3 cards. Next up, you're probably going to play like Dark Hole. Dark Hole's really good. I don't think you need it, but I mean, if you want to. Heavy Storms are amazing, especially for going for finishers. Heal cards, I would recommend Soul of the Pure, at least as a one-of in most decks. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of really strong spell cards like that. You can also go Change of Heart, Brain Control, Magic Neutralizing Force Field. But we're over here at 27 cards. We have like 400 deck cost to go for 13 cards if you're going to 1,000. But I mean, if you're playing in an 800 card cost tournament or something, there are certain things that I'd highly recommend. I'd recommend considering extra equips. I know it's kind of hard. They don't exactly take many equips, so Megamorph's probably your best buddy. But you can consider triple Curse Breaker. So if you put in 3 Curse Breakers, and if you're really going low cost, you can put in 3 Cocoon of Evolutions. And I wanted to also put, say, Call of the Haunted. I would highly recommend considering a Call of the Haunted, just because if somebody tries to snipe you with reptiles, you can play Call of the Haunted, and you probably get to keep an extra, like, 2 Perfectly Ultimates. And that's enough to just absolutely destroy anything that reptiles ever wanted to consider doing. So, yeah, Call of the Haunted. Definitely a great honorable mention, especially if you think your opponent's going to counterpick you. And, yeah, so if you want to go cheap, Larva of Moth, Time Wizard, Call of the Haunted, Curse Breaker, those are the kind of things you'd go for. And then on the high end, there's a ton of stuff you can go absolutely ham with on any of these decks to especially really high expense spells. And you can also go, like, you could also go Mirror Forces, Mirror Walls, these other things. And then the other thing to always consider, you can always play Ancient Tree of Enlightenment, if I can find it. Yeah, number 655. You can always play this card in your decks. You can also play Temple of Skulls, which cancels out all spell cards. Completely just instantly wins the game against some decks, so I'd highly recommend considering that. So that was insects, which has probably the most flexibility because there's only like 12 insects you really have to play. And then these 6 warriors, so you're at like 18, 24 cards after the equips. So you have a bunch of flexibility. So that means that you can easily adapt from like down at the like 600 deck cost level all the way up to like a 1200 or a 1400 deck cost format. And last but not least in this group of decks that I'm considering here is my Mystical Elf type deck. So this is a light buff deck. You could either use, I'd probably use a fairy for a deck leader, Probably a high-level fairy, although you can do low-level fairies. You just get life point recovery, which is kind of unfortunate. But these are all cards that I would absolutely put in my deck. Let me go ahead and mute Discord. So I'm not using game capture today because it's broken. Thanks OBS updates. Okay, so starting off at the top, 3 Mystical Elves. This is basically required in all of these decks. 3 Magician of Faiths. These are for recycling your Darkness Approaches. Unhappy Maiden, Fusion Fodder for making Mystical Elf. Happy Lover. This is one of your beat sticks. It's also usable in the Fusion, if I remember correctly. So, great choice to have in your deck. Also, its effect is really strong, especially when you give it an extra, like, 4,000 attack and defense. Winged Elf for fusions into Mystical Elf. Ray and Temperature, this is your other beat stick. So this is if I were doing fairy type. You can do other beat sticks like Blue Eyes White Dragon works, or other strong light creatures. Honestly, I think these have probably, Ray and Temperature and Happy Lover have probably the best effect for any light creature that you can use as a beat stick. So that's why I use them. And then 3 Dancing Elves for more fusions. As you can see, we're down to 21 cards through the deck, and we're just going through, like, this is just cheap stuff to use. All of this is cheap. And then a Mountain and a Yami, just because one of each is really nice, because that way you can counter whatever your opponent's playing. Maybe you go to 2 of each. I don't know, we're at 32 cards already, so you have to consider what you're going to match up against. Next up, this is the expensive part of this deck, kind of necessary for a flip deck like this. This is probably the closest you're going to get to a control deck in this game. But 3 Darkness Approaches. Unfortunately, this is 150 deck cost, so that's why we're already at 600. So unfortunately, these are expensive, but I think they're necessary for this type of deck. Next up, Silver Bow and Arrows, Bright Castles. If you aren't using fairies as your end-all be-all beat sticks, change out the Silver Bow and Arrow for something else. Whatever else you want. Now, this deck has the ability to go infinite. You can play whatever you want in it. But this is like a good start. And unfortunately, this is already 32 cards. Like, you can put in Soul of the Pure, plus another equip or 2, or a couple spells or something, and you're going to be at 40 cards. And you have about 400 deck cost again to get to 1,000 over 8 cards. Means each one averages about 50 deck cost. And there's a ton of really good cards you could choose here. This is the one deck that I didn't put Eye Armor and Green Kappa in, because you're going to be super susceptible to Magical Neutralizing Force Field, and other effects like Jiraiya. So to compensate for that, probably the first thing I would look to add to this deck is probably 3 Jowls of Dark Demise. This card basically just functions as a hard removal to get rid of your opponent's Jiraiya. You take control of it and then you can just walk over it, or you can use it as a beat stick against your opponent. But now we're at 35 cards and we haven't even gotten to 700 deck cost. So now we'd have 5 cards to work with. We have Infinite Magician of Faith flips. So expensive spell and traps are extremely valuable. So I would highly recommend stuff like Mimikatz, and Monster Reborns, and Dark Holes, or Heavy Storms, or some other cards. But all of this is like, this is just how I go about building a deck. I go about and I pick a bunch of core cards that I want to have in the deck because they're just really good. Like this light package here, or this plant package, or this insect package. And if I were doing it for something else, like, I don't know, like if I wanted to do dinosaurs, I'd go and put together a list of good fusions to use for dinosaurs, which are actually reptiles plus like waters. And I would put a whole bunch of those in the deck and get to like 20 some cards, and then I'd fill out the rest with equips and good spell and traps. That's just basically how I approach pretty much building any deck. If I were doing it with reptiles, Serpentine Princess, Darkness Approaches, triple Magician of Faith, and whatever good reptiles I think there are, which there aren't any, but Emperor of Land and Sea, Grappler, Armored Lizard's really good, or as good as you're gonna get in reptiles. But I mean, same thing, like, for fish, I'd go into 7-colored fish for fusions. Pick whichever fusion I want for Sea Serpent, so it's either Aqua Dragon or Sea King Dragon, and you can build a deck around them that way. Machines are the same way. I try to build up... machines can be slightly different. They're going to be very expensive, usually, for their cost. You'd probably use Metal Zoas, I would guess, as one option. Metal Zoa's deck leader decreased the summoning cost, and then these only cost 6. Not my favorite. You can also go the Mechanical Chaser fusion with Metal Dragon to go into a bunch of Barrel Dragons. It's the one I did for when I made a deck profile for machines. But yeah, that's just pick really strong cards, like Blast Juggler. 3 Blast Jugglers in the deck and 3 Blast Spheres, that's a super good combo. So that's usually how I build these decks. I go grab the best cards in each archetype. So if I were in Dragons, I'd kind of cry because there aren't the greatest cards in Dragons. You're going to either go for MBDs, or you're going to go for like Trihorns or B-Skulls or something, and theme it around that. So like Dark Dragons have their own theme. Fire Dragons with MBDs, they're a nice theme. It's easy to play Red Eyes. And then this is part of the reason that Blue Eyes are kind of hard to play, is because they're so expensive. You end up not having this headroom at the end of the deck. When you're done building a deck with the Blue Eyes, like you're going to end up with like 900, 1200 or so deck cost, and you're like 35 cards, and you're like, well, I guess I could just throw in Curse Breakers to finish out the deck. And that's kind of just how it goes. But that's how I usually build decks, and like if you were to ask me to build a deck that's like 700, 800, 900, 1000 deck cost, it would start with one of these, or something similar, another core of these decks, and then I just add on the right amount of expensive spell and traps on the end to make the deck really strong, or to round out the deck. So yeah, if you wanted to know how I'd approach deck building, that's pretty much it. It would all depend on the format, so I hope that was helpful. I hope it was all enlightening, and thank you all for watching, and have a nice day.